is interesting. It is interesting to me that while we had 68 people registered by starting time, we have a total of 30 people, which I always find interesting. So our proportion changed. Well, all right, Jonas, you want to put up my first slide for me?
Do that. I'm going to mute everybody first, and then I will put it all up. Let's do that. Okay.
All right, good to go. Well,
there we go.
Welcome everybody to our summer quarterly meeting. And we're so glad to have you here. As I say, we have 30 people who registered, who are present now, but we did have 68. So I'm sure that we'll have a lot more people who are going to join us soon. And today we're very happy that we're going to hear from our two WAVE Founders Award winners and also get some very useful knowledge about insurance issues for villages. Next slide, Jonas. So as you can see, this is a full program. So here's a little bit of information. It is being recorded. You got that notice, and it will be on our YouTube channel in a few days. If you go to our website and you look at WAVE events, you'll see a link to the YouTube channel there. And I'm sure later in the chat, Carolyn can post it. And please do use the chat when you want to share any information with anyone else here. Next slide, Jonas. So I wanted to remind you that we have this wonderful mentoring and mutual support program. We have a number of very experienced people who are ready and eager to talk with you. If you're a startup and you need help starting up, or if you're an established village and you run into some issues and you think there just might be someone out there who could help you, our mentors are standing by at the phones. So please feel free to go to our website and you'll see a separate request form for a startup village or for an established village. Also, we always welcome new mentors. There is a sign-up form on the website as well. In addition to the mentoring, of course, we do have these facilitated Zoom discussions on specific problems or solutions or opportunities. Next slide. So we are taking August off, like most of Washington, but please do mark your calendars in advance. We have a new special speaker series, and on the 29th of September, Dr. Michael Kogan of George Washington University is going to be speaking on integrative medicine and geriatrics. One of our mutual support sessions will be on the 10th of October, and that's Queen Anne's at Home with their project called a Ready or Not workshop. Now, Queen Anne's was one of our Founders Award applicants, and their project has gotten quite a bit of attention. And some of you may have seen that they gave a very successful presentation with the V2V network, but we're going to repeat that in October. And then our next quarterly meeting will be on the 17th. So we hope to see you there. Next slide, Jonas. So for more information, that's our URL. We do plan to launch a new website. Watch out for an email, which will tell you when it goes live. And it is going to keep that same web address. That's our email that doesn't change. And feel free always to email me directly if you have an issue or question, or you want to volunteer to help us do any of our programs, or just had something that you wanted to figure out. Next slide, Jonas. So we are very proud and pleased that we were able to launch the new Founders Award for Village Excellence last year, or actually this year. It opened last year for this year's award. Our goal was to promote and spotlight great village programs or services that are outstanding examples of villages' contributions to the well-being of older adults in their communities. And we wanted projects that could inspire other villages. One award is given to a village with an annual operating budget of under $25,000, and one award goes to a village with an annual budget of $25,000 or more. And each award comes with a $1,000 prize. and opportunities to share lessons learned with other villages and organizations serving older adults, as we are doing today. We announced the winners in April, and so our winners are going to talk to us now. And I do want to let you know that there will be a 2023 award as well. So watch your email for an announcement. We'll start promoting it well in advance, so you'll have time to think about it. But it's most likely that, just as last year, that the application process will open in early December, with applications due in mid-February or thereabouts. So stay tuned. Okay, next slide, please. It's time to move on to our wonderful speakers, and we're going to start with the award for a village with a budget under 25,000. Hyattsville Aging in Place, or HAP, had a wonderful project, Route 1 Food Security. And it's my great pleasure to call on Lisa Walker, a founding member, treasurer, and chair of the Neighborhood Outreach Committee, and Chris Allenbach, who's the chair of the board and also chair of their volunteer steering committee. So Lisa and Chris, I don't know who's speaking first, but we'll turn it over to you.
Unmute. Okay, let me share my screen. And okay, there we go. Good morning, and I am Chris Allenbach, current board chair of Hyattsville Aging in Place, or HAP, as we say, HAP for short. And I'd like to thank WAVE again for recognizing HAP with the Founders Award and for the opportunity to tell you about it. Our food security program is one that we worked very hard on and we're very proud of. HAP is the oldest village in the Route 1 corridor of Prince George's County. We were founded in 2011 and became a 501c3 in 2012. We're an all-volunteer organization. We have no employees except for one wonderful consultant who helps us with our social media and with some of the heavy lifting, literally, in some of our other projects. Our goals, I'm sorry, I'm a little under the weather today. I tested positive for COVID on Friday, so
oh my word. Oh,
I'm struggling just a bit here today, but our goals for HAP are to educate, advocate, and serve our seniors in the Hyattsville area, and also to connect them to the greater Hyattsville community. So Lisa Walker was board chair last year and oversaw the food security program. So she's going to tell you more about it, and I will try and run the slides successfully for you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. I'm sorry about COVID.
Yeah, me too.
I guess I won't stop in today.
No, don't come by today.
So we have up on the a slide up right now that tells you the results of this food security grant. It was a large grant for us. And I'm not going to talk specifically about each one of the activities under the grant, but do want to say that this grant, and it was really I think it was serendipitous. We had done work with the Greater Washington Community Foundation previously. We had had an early pandemic grant from them to get money out to seniors around the Route 1 corridor, and worked with our county council members and school board members to do that. But this one, they came to us in the fall of 2020 and said, would you like a renewal grant? We said, of course. And they said, however, it's got to be on food security or food insecurity. We were not terribly knowledgeable about or expert in this area, and wanted to figure out how we could do it, and went ahead and said, yes, absolutely, this is an opportunity. We would like to do this grant. Rather than reinvent the wheel, we decided that we would find the experts in the area who were delivering food and support their efforts. to get fresh food and meals out to seniors. We began by locating all the small food pantries around us. Several are large, but all of the small ones as well. And we knew that Meals on Wheels, which is centered in College Park, delivers food to seniors around the Route 1 corridor, was struggling because of the extra demand for food. We also knew that there was a CDC, a Community Development Corporation, in the greater Riverdale area that was working with mom and pop restaurants to get food out to get hot meals out to people in the area that needed it. They were serving churches and some of the food pantries and several of the buildings that had lower income folks in it that needed food. So we decided that we would work with them. This program was really interesting in that they paid the mom and pop restaurants to make the food, which allowed them to keep in business, as well as to keep their employees on, which meant that during this continuing pandemic, that people didn't lose their jobs and become poorer. So we also wanted to work with, we have very successful farmers market in Riverdale Park, and the farmers, we learned, were also struggling because people weren't coming out because they were afraid of catching COVID. They had to make, distancing requirements and masking requirements, which some people didn't want to do. And then many seniors weren't going out at all. So we arranged with the farmers market to buy fresh fruit and vegetables and delivered them to a number of different places, including seniors in the Hyattsville area. But also we were able to get a substantial amount of food on a couple of instances to the Meals on Wheels program in College Park, which expanded their repertoire and enabled them to serve more people. Finally, we established a relationship, or continued a relationship, with GoGo Grandparent, which many of you may know about, which allows seniors to call into a central number to get transportation. We included this in the grant because we knew some people wanted to get to grocery stores or wanted special things in grocery stores, but were not able to get there. And at the time, HAP was not fully back up doing rides, so that our relationship with GoGo Grandparent really helped us out and helped a lot of people in the community out. We happened to have a senior building that experienced a fire, and one whole floor was put into temporary housing, and they were going back and forth on a regular basis to get things from their apartments. I just want to talk a little bit about the results of this grant. This was a one-time grant. It lasted through the 2021 year, but it did end, and there was no question they were not going to renew another grant. This, I think, was definitely okay for us. It gave us the opportunity to establish relationships with many of the organizations up and down the Route 1 corridor that we did not have close working relationships with. It meant that our collaboration together established trust. It meant that we could continue working, for example, with the Meals on Wheels program, which we have continued to do. And from time to time, when local farmers have extra food available, we've distributed this year food to the Meals on Wheels program. We're continuing to work with the farmers market with our own funds this summer to deliver food to seniors in our community. We have been delivering every couple of weeks fresh fruit and vegetables, small deliveries, but able to get them out to seniors. This really is I think the grant was very helpful in opening our eyes to expanding maybe our mission, but certainly expanding our relationships along Route 1. I don't think it was mission creep. We won't continue doing this unless we have more funds to do it, except for the delivering food directly to the Hyattsville area. But this did allow us both to get out beyond Hyattsville, to work with Riverdale Park, to work with College Park and some of the other communities and some of the unincorporated communities in our area. That I'd be pleased, we'd both be pleased to answer questions. Here's contact information for HAP if you want to contact us later with questions. And we're available to talk further.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So Jonas, let's see, we don't want the spotlight. You want to get back to all of our attendees. How do we, I guess, there we go. So let's view all the attendees and get people to start raising some hands there. There we go. Well, I will kick it off. I think that this was really a marvelous example of reaching out to the community, as you said, but of logistics too. I mean, you managed to pull together quite a variety of different aspects of this food security activity and execute it. Now, you've said, frankly, that this was a grant and it was the grant that made it possible, and it won't be continued. So if you, for the other villages listening, can you think, just based on your knowledge of what it takes now to reach out into your community to accomplish any kind of a goal where other community actors are going to be important, what would you suggest to other villages who wanted to think about being of more service to their wider community? Are there directions they can look? Are there types of partners who you think seem to be most responsive? So what advice would you have for some of the others?
Chris, do you want to take that or should I take it?
No, go ahead, Lisa.
So I think all of us at the beginning of our forming our villages started by working with various nonprofit organizations and churches in the area. And that's certainly a way to, I think right now, to check in again to see if people are experiencing additional problems that you can be helpful for. Certainly the churches, the food pantries, if you've got farmers markets around and you've got seniors that need, that would like to be able to get fresh food but can't get out, and that is true of many people in our area. I think the collaboration with other nonprofits, we did talk to several organizations which, had the money been greater, we would have been able to work with. So I think, and obviously food is the basics for seniors, and many people are not able to get out to it. So I offer that. Chris, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think just, at the time of the worst part of COVID, we were hearing about organizations that were in our community that were trying to serve seniors or serve people generally in the community, like the C-CAR based on Kenilworth Avenue. So some of it is just being attuned to what's happening in your own community and possibly through your city. What is your city doing? What is your local government doing with organizations and partners? Yeah,
I would just add that the city of Hyattsville had a huge food delivery program, but it was not always fresh food, and we knew that we didn't want to duplicate that. So we reached out beyond our boundaries to see what we could do further. So there are, as you probably know, there are a number of small communities around Route 1 that we were able to help with, and those relationships have lasted.
Other questions for them? Well, I have one more then. Full of questions. So many villages focus on their own members because they have to, especially if they have paid memberships. And even if they don't, their focus is on their small community and their neighborhoods and making those kinds of connections. And to do this kind of effort, takes a lot of added attention. Now, obviously, you had dollars to help pay for some of the things that you did, but the other stuff was just your time. Do you have any words of advice for villages who just feel that they can't do anything, that they are so stretched? And we know this is true. Executive directors and board leaderships are really very stretched to feel that they're adequately serving their own communities. Do you have any thoughts about that dilemma?
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have been lucky enough to have this wonderful gentleman in our community who has helped us with both with our social media, but also when I said he does the heavy lifting, he was the one who was picking up vegetables and delivering them to various places. So we were able to, when we submitted our budget for the grant, we were able to build in some of his time, which was tremendously helpful because Lisa spent a lot of hours, our board spent a lot of hours, but I don't think without Carter, we would have been able to do the things at the level that we did them.
Thank you.
I would, if I could just add to that quickly, Mary Jo, I just want to say collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. I know that in the District of Columbia and certainly in the Maryland area and in the Montgomery County area, there are many, many villages, but so collaboration across those lines, it seems to me, and helping, using, I don't know, deciding on ways of helping each other, both with volunteers. That's something that we have looked at here, and we haven't quite established yet, but we've looked at here with the villages up and down Route 1 and with Chevrolet, possibly, lending volunteers as we or others have more and they don't have the need. So, I think all of the foundations have been stressing collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. It's hard, and I know that many villages that are, that have paid members and have lots of activities, do struggle to do both.
Any other questions for them? Well, seeing none, thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
I really hope you get lots of inquiries about how to do something like this. So next slide, please, Jonas. So the winner of the 25,000 and over award was Little Falls Village for its project on COVID vaccine and booster clinics. And I'm pleased to introduce Lisa Owen, who's the executive director of Little Falls Village. So Lisa, over to you.
Hi there, Mary Jo. Thank you so much. I think you're making me a co-host right now so I can share my screen with you.
You should have been, yes. I thought we had done that. Okay.
Not yet.
There we go. All righty.
Perfect.
I do it.
All right, got it.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Owen. I am the executive director of Little Falls Village. I want to thank WAVE, first of all, Mary Jo and the leadership at WAVE. It's incredible what you guys do. And it's so important for you, for us, that you convene us every now and again so that we can learn from each other. So thank you for everything. I am honored to be a part of Little Falls Village. We have an outstanding board and 2 paid staff here at Little Falls Village. Just so you know, we do have a membership. It is 2 30-hour-a-week staff and a 9-person board. We currently have 191 members and 135 volunteers, many of whom are also members. So Little Falls Village we're in Bethesda, Maryland, and this was our response to COVID. As many of you we were all scrambling in early February when the vaccines came out. And, Little Falls Village again, I would be remiss if I did not mention Lisa Rosenthal. Lisa Rosenthal was the executive director at the time that our first clinics happened. I was a board member and organizing volunteers. So we've all shifted in some positions since then, but the good news is that we have been able to keep it going, keep these clinics, vaccine and booster clinics going. And our most recent one happened April 19th, 2022. So we have had 6 vaccine and COVID booster clinics since our first one, February 19th, 2021. So over 1,200 shots in arms. We're very proud of that. Here is the what people see when they're coming in to the Sumner Village Community Center. They're greeted by our volunteer corps. Every time we had a clinic, we probably had about 20 to 25 volunteers for the entire day, which was usually starting at 8 a.m. and finishing around 4 p.m. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to the next slide. So of course, yes, it takes a village. When you say collaboration, that's absolutely the truth. With regards to these, when we were trying to solve the problem, the problem was, as you know, the rollout was difficult. Our seniors were driving long distances, and there was a lot of fear, and I guess also a little bit of frustration, right? So we did our best to find out in the community who needed their shot and how can we assist. So we went to Giant Pharmacy and created that link with Giant Pharmacy. Again, it could be, when we're moving from this presentation to what you could do, it doesn't have to be Giant Pharmacy, but this was an example of who stepped in and was able to partner with us at that time. So if you think about it, the vaccine came out late January. We had 10 days to mobilize and react to the frustrations of our members and our community members who were eligible. And so we created this partnership and were able to deliver the first clinic on February 19th, 2021. So that is, we had 10 days to mobilize. We have our collaborations with our neighborhood associations. I used to be, that is a Glen Echo Heights Citizens Association. They commit $500 every year to our village, but we have 18 other civic associations in our neighborhood, all of whom can help identify eligible people, especially in a time of COVID when you need to, like, I've got 89-year-old Miss Smith on with me. I mean, can I send her to you? Absolutely. So these relationships that have been cultivated and nurtured over time were absolutely essential when we needed to respond immediately. So I say the neighborhood associations were integral, the fire department, the Sumner Village Community Center, the Sumner Village Residency. This is a condominium that is nearby that is a naturally occurring, retirement community. So it's a NORC. Many of us live in communities. Bethesda is certainly a NORC. And so when you're trying to establish these relationships, and whether you're going to state officials or local officials, you can make the case that you're a natural partner to safeguard seniors because we are a naturally occurring retirement community. So let me go on from here. But our volunteers, first of all, we all have board members, but then, you have board members, right? The go-tos, the people who step up and they're action-oriented. Ann Humphrey is our president. She on site, she's interviewing, she's checking people in. Right here on the right top is Carolyn Montrose. She's motivated and mobilized our volunteer corps for the last 6 vaccine clinics. So, everything from directing people in to park, going to people's homes and shoveling their sidewalks, because if you recall in February, there was snow. And so we had to send our volunteers out, make sure people could safely get here, transport them to and from the clinics. It was a true community effort. And most touching of all is this picture that's down low is a senior at Walt Whitman High School who was playing classical music during the entire time to settle people's nerves because they were getting their shot, including his grandparents. Vincent was just a delight to have, and it just made me cry because it was like, you know, he was there because everyone, if you recall that time, it seems like so long ago, we're all maskless and we're all doing our things. That was a very tense and emotional time. So I wanted just to give you a little feel of what it was like. This is kind of funny, and it's not the best filming, let me just tell you that, but I just wanted to show you what the clinic walkthrough was like. It doesn't have any volume, but people were greeted out front. We finished all their paperwork, right? They've completed all their paperwork, brought it to the clinic. They were let in at every step of the way, checked in. So we made sure that once they got back to the pharmacist from Giant, that they had everything they needed. So they were double checked. Right here, you can see this gentleman with his legs crossed. That's the Glen Echo Fire Department. They were always present, always overseeing our participants, because just to make sure that there were no adverse effects of the vaccine or the booster. Again, this was not limited to the membership of Little Falls Village. It started with Little Falls Village members and volunteers who were eligible, but we opened it up to the community. The very first vaccine clinic, we gave almost 200 shots to eligible people. So this clinic walkthrough, they're going back. You can see a lot of yellow vests. We had so many people who were eager to help. And, you know, they went in, they got their shot, spent 15 minutes, volunteers overlooking, making sure everyone was okay, little bottled water, little candy. And I wanted to go, actually, let me go back to this picture, this beautiful picture of the rainbow. That was drawn by students at Little Flower, if I'm not mistaken, Little Flower school, because they put these little chocolates and we're so happy you got boosted today. And these little messages were sent to every participant as they left our clinic. So everyone felt like everyone was really just rooting them on and supporting them. So that was the clinic walkthrough. And then I just want you to hear from people that participated in this and what it meant to them. And this is Congresswoman Connie Morella.
It is wonderful. It's in my community. It's well managed, organized. The courtesies that are extended, it's like they're welcoming me to a community event.
And then what it meant to our members.
A neighbor of mine drove me here, and I don't drive anymore. From in, I got right in. I was even early. I had a 12 o'clock appointment. It's 12 o'clock now, and I'm all finished. Great. It was great. It was just terrific. I'm just so delighted that it came, that it was here, right in Summer Village, where I live. I've been waiting for something nearby, and I'm 96 years old, and I'm in one big group. You're in the right group. So I was really very pleased. It was just handled wonderfully. Lisa deserves a great deal of congratulatory applause for what she's done behind the board. Real, thank you. A neighbor of mine drove.
So this fun picture is we are vax boosted and enjoying the sights and each other's company. That's what it means. We have become, we're out on the town where people feel comfortable. I mean, right, obviously there are some rising rates right now. Chris, you're the first to attest to that. A lot of people have COVID right now, and it's, but we do things carefully. We do a lot of outdoor events, but none of this would be possible, right, if not for becoming partners in community health. I know we provide non-medical services, but we're important linkages to community health. If people are struggling to deliver to the audience that needs it most, and we are natural partners in delivering assistance to the most vulnerable of our members. So that's it. We work the problem. we engage the network that we all have, right? We all that, all of our partners in our community, we create capacity, right? We enable more people to get shots, boosted, or whatever it is, if we're even looking beyond boosters and class, we have the capacity, we are entree into the demographic. If that's the demographic that needs to be served, we are natural partners. We're convenient. It makes sense for this to be coming into our neighborhoods because we can, we safeguarded our people by not driving long distances and or risking exposure. But more importantly, we were recognized as partners in community health because we protected our vulnerable members, but we reduced the burden on doctors and hospitals. And it elevated our community presence because we were scrambling. We were talking to congressmen, state legislators. We were talking to our local county officials and just saying, look, if you need help with this rollout, it makes sense to work with villages. It was not just about Little Falls Village, but villages. And hopefully through this partnership, Giant was an example of stepping in as pharmacists. It could be other pharmacists that do this, and like Safeway and CVS, et cetera. But to create these long-term partnerships, we have that now with Giant. They are looking to provide more financial support and in-kind contributions of clinics to villages that happen to be in the communities where they serve. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I've included the contact number here for Rimble Gabry because she was the person that we went to. But again, it could be any pharmacist. But anyway, I'm delighted to be here with you and I look forward to any of your questions.
Hi, this is Pat Matthews after the Village of Tacoma Park. Where did you set up your clinic?
Our clinic was set up at Sumner Village. The residents, it's a condominium complex that's right in our neighborhood, and they have a community center within that complex. So right there.
Thank you.
Jonas, could you take it to the gallery view? Or maybe stop sharing? There we go. Thank you very much. That was a very good question. Other questions for Lisa? Well, again, I always have one. So again, we all hope and pray that we won't be faced with such an acute pandemic situation and health situation. You've certainly laid out a wonderful blueprint if we do. But again, thinking of all of the villages, other villages in 2022 and hopefully 2023, where there is still this issue, there are still serious needs, but it's not so acute. Do you have ideas as to what villages might consider or contemplate as a way of helping their members in their community and even their extended community get through this new COVID or other, health situations that may crop up, and as you weigh the weight of all of the effort that went into doing what you do and knowing how stretched everybody is, how would you advise them to balance the cost versus the benefit of trying to step up to do work in the health area?
So a great question. I don't think it's over. I do think we're going to have to really think about the next couple of months. Just so you know, we will be probably doing another booster clinic or vaccine clinic. If you all know, there is a booster that's going to come out at the end of September, early October. But in addition to that, there's going to be an annual vaccine for COVID. And so there's going to be this question mark about which one you should, because one's going to be dealing with Omicron, one's going to be dealing with Delta. So there's a lot of questions still to be answered, but I do think, I know for the purposes of working with Giant, we have been asked, you might want to consider villages doing more of these pop-up health, like whether it's clinics around, the flu vaccine, shingles, and pneumonia, those kinds of things, because you can get them all in one go. And I would say that the COVID, not necessarily with the flu and that all those things, but you can get a lot of them in one go. And it's and what we found out with our members is that they really loved going in and seeing familiar faces in the community. And the mobile, like I said, our volunteer groups really mobilize to be there on site. And if you have that volunteer group or you have those connections with your neighborhood associations who can identify people like, oh, here, these are, because everyone has a board, every civic association has a board, and those are usually pretty active volunteers. A lot of them were sent our way to assist. But Mary Jo, I do think that while we're not going to have, I hope, knock on wood, have that again, I think we're going to remain in the business of safeguarding our members and our vulnerable members with health, because, I think I saw it in the chat that other people have worked with them and with Giant, for instance, and they did a drive-through clinic. There are many ways in which you can do it. And many of us have those partnerships already with these community sites that make it easy to do. It's not that expensive.
Thank you. Thank you. I see Cheverly Village. Is that you, Layla? Has his hand?
Yes, Cheverly Village, and sorry, multitasking here. What I wanted to bring up was the idea of the expanded clinics beyond COVID vaccination, and then also a caution related to that. With Cheverly Village, we've done flu clinics for several years now. And the flu vaccine, shingles, pneumonia vaccine, making all of those available. And then after our first year, a lesson learned that I would want to share with others is to spend time thinking about those individuals who may be uninsured, or that the pharmacy that you're working with and their insurance company are not compatible, and to pay attention to that up front and to have very clear instructions, and then to decide, depending upon the budget of your village or the budget of your community, whether or not you're able to support making sure that everyone who comes through, for example, at least is able to get the flu vaccine at no cost to them, whether or not they have insurance, or if their insurance wouldn't be accepted by the pharmacy that you're working with. And I don't know if you've run into that now, Lisa, given that you're focusing mainly on COVID, but anything that you would have to offer as far as advice in working with insurance.
My experiences with the COVID vaccine, and just to say that we have allowed several people that were non-insured to get the vaccine. So we did come across that. Now, how do I say this? We're a bit of there's a lot of wealth in this area, right? There's I won't lie about that. That's the truth. There's we had a lot of, we reached out to everybody, even with their caregivers. You can't just safeguard just one person in the group. It has to be the collective. So if you have a caregiver, a home care aide that would never be able to get this, we said, please bring them in. Please bring them in. The people that were, volunteer drivers, I'm like, if you're driving, you need to be vaccinated. You have to think about everybody who's in contact with our communities. So, so we had several people who were uninsured, and I was delighted that Giant said, let them in.
Lisa and Layla, we do need to keep moving on because we have a very full plenary. I want to thank you very much for that. And Layla, that was a very good consideration to raise. So Jonas, if you just turn me back to the slides for a minute.
Sure. And I just want to make sure you put, Lisa, a couple people asked for your contact information. If you could put that in the chat, that would definitely, or the general contact information for Little Falls would be helpful.
Right. Well, and I wanted to thank you all, and I wanted to remind people that the summaries of the winners projects and information, short summaries about all the other nominated projects is on our website, so you can find it there. Okay, next slide, please, Jonas. So we're moving into our plenary now, and I'm going to turn the program over to Seal Garrett, who is the Executive Director of At Home Alexandria and a member of the WAVE board, to introduce the plenary panel. Take it away, Seal.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. Okay, so switching gears. Thanks, everybody. Glad we have such a good crowd today. We're going to take the next, looking at the clock, the next 50 minutes or so for this panel discussion on insurance for villages. Here's how we're going to do it. The first 30 minutes will be questions that our interviewer, Lee Simplis, will ask the panelists. And then for the last 20 plus minutes or so, we will open the discussion to questions from the audience. And after the panel discussion, we'll take a 5-minute break while we transition to the breakout sessions. And I can go over that a little bit later. You are welcome to post questions in the chat at any time as they come to you. But we'll hold off on those questions until after the first 30 minutes of presentation time. Allow me to just quickly introduce our panelists, if I may. We have Andy Cooley from Cooley and Darling Insurance, whom many of you already know, since several villages in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia areas work with his agency. He has worked in this industry serving nonprofits for over 25 years, and he currently works with over 1,500 nonprofits. Ken Harris is with us. Great to have you, Ken. Ken is with the Albany Guardian Society. You may have seen them attending our V2V sessions, and in the past couple of years, they've really gotten very involved with Village to Village Network. They are active supporters of the Village movement. Their work is to improve the lives of seniors, their families, and their caregivers. And they are one of the oldest nonprofits in the Capital Region area. Again, big supporters of the Village movement. Ken in particular has worked in depth on risk management and insurance guidelines for villages and other groups serving older adults in the area. So glad to have you, Ken. Emily Van Loon is also on the panel. She is the current treasurer of the Village of Tacoma Park. She has a long history of managing nonprofits. She's a CPA, and her experience includes serving as CFO for So Others Might Eat, and CFO as for the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. Risk management is a topic she has deep involvement in. And our interviewer is not too shabby herself. You will recognize Lee from her days as the executive director for Foggy Bottom Weston Village. And she also served as WAVE's president until she and her husband moved back to Ohio a couple of years ago. Currently, she is using her talents as a senior fellow at the Dayton Foundation, where she leads a group of older adults who are transitioning into working for nonprofits in the community. So we're glad that she's using her talents in that way, though we miss her. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Lee and we'll get the questions started. Lee?
Thank you, Seal. Hello, everyone. It's great to be back with you all. Let's start out this morning talking about risk management. Ken, I know this is a whole industry in and of itself. So if you would help us understand some of the basics of insurance risk management and talk a little bit about the different areas and what is important for us all to know from a village standpoint.
Sure. I just want to start out by saying thanks so much for having me here today. We started in 2017, Albany Guardian Society with the State Office for Aging, the Capital Region Villages Collaborative. And we really looked at WAVE as our way that we wanted to be in the future. So we always started out many years, and we still do, saying, if we could only be like WAVE. And we've made some progress, but I just really commend you and Barbara for all the work you've done, and for I really thank you for having me here today. So risk management, as everybody knows, if you've seen one village, you've seen one village as far as services go. Some have transportation, some do large events, some are quite small. But I would like to propose that each one is, when you're asking the question, what is the best insurance? There's one answer for all villages, and it's the insurance that you never use. Risk management is an essential part of your deciding what type of insurance you need and what type of insurance that you will plan for. And it's one of those planning processes that is not stagnant. It's something that you absolutely need to do. We help a lot of villages in the development formation stage. So that's an extremely important part of that discussion, because of course it's one of the highest cost items for any village. But it's also one of those pieces that is going to maintain the village and hopefully keep that in business, because one bad event could really be the end of a village. So understanding this risk management part is important. In a collaboration with Council Services Plus, developed we're almost done with it, a white paper called Risk Management and Insurance Essentials for Nonprofit Village Organizations. And the thrust of this is to talk about risk management. We really feel that it is something that needed to be talked about and discussed, specifically the villages. So that's what this paper will do. We hope to have it out by the end of the summer. And I was really hoping that this session today, we'd be able to pick up little bits and pieces of what is important. But there are really, when you're looking at risk management, there's 4 basic types. There's financial, and that of course is if somebody became hurt during your event, including a transportation. Obviously, if you have a transportation service, insurance is something you absolutely need to look at in great detail with your agent. So the financial aspect of developing a risk management plan. And then there's operational. If you have a loss of services and people are paying dues and expect services to be ongoing, what is your plan for keeping those services in place? The other 2, human capital. This is something that during our work with the NYSOFA, we developed for 3 years now, a Villages Technical Assistance Center. And this paper that I'm talking about came about from that project, is that we hired staff to really help villages in their journey for starting and ongoing operations of a village. So we will provide hands-on from all sorts of aspects of a village, from incorporation to operations and staffing. And one thing that we've heard about, from the start, and I'm sure you struggle with this, is human capital. Most villages, if they have staff, they have 1 or 2. You lose the executive director, and they give a 4-week notice. If you're lucky, you're in a pickle, because they are often, when you lose 50% of your staff, you could lose the services that you are offering. And the last piece of the risk management is reputational. Your reputation is everything, and if you're ongoing membership and your stead in the community, it really depends on your reputation. So that is an interesting part of your risk management, is to look at what your reputation is and how you can keep that good reputation in your community.
Thank you, Ken. We all know that insurance regulations vary by state to state. Andy, could you speak to us about the waive jurisdictions and the regulations and what those insurance requirements are in those various areas? I know you're licensed in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Also, could you share with us a little bit more about general liability policies as well as directors and officers insurance? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me as well. Ken, thank you very much for the discussion on the risk management. Insurance certainly is not a substitute for risk management. It's simply a component of it. As far as required coverages go, DC, Virginia, Maryland, there's really only a couple that are legally required. Number 1 is workers' compensation. If you have employees in DC and Maryland, just 1 employee, you are required to have workers' compensation. In Virginia, You are required to carry workers' compensation if you have 3 or more employees. For the most part, most of our village clients, we find that all volunteer. And so workers' compensation is not required for them. And we do sometimes get questions, what if I'm hiring a 1099, a contract employee? Legally, you're not required to have workers' compensation if you just have contract employees. However, you do have an exposure for workers' compensation if you hire a contractor that does not have their own workers' compensation insurance. A lot of times that's what we're doing when we hire someone that manages the office as a 1099. If they do get hurt while working, it is your responsibility to provide workers' compensation benefits. And if you don't have a workers' compensation policy, you're paying those benefits out of pocket. So if you are hiring people, even if it's not required, it might be a real good idea to have workers' compensation. The other required coverage is automobile coverage. If you own a vehicle, state law requires that you carry automobile with certain minimum limits. In Virginia, I think it's $30,000. It's ridiculously low as far as what the requirements are. If you're gonna buy auto insurance, you typically want to have probably at least $1 million limit, and that's going to be far more than what the state requirements are. But most of the village clients we find don't own vehicles. They have they have volunteers using their own vehicles, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Those are really the 2 requirements. The next type of insurance that's probably the most important for a village is general liability insurance. General liability insurance is what protects the organization, the employees, the volunteers, the members of the board, directors, and officers. And you'll hear me say that same thing when I'm talking about the directors and officers policy. Really, properly written, any of your liability policies should cover all of those people. The distinction between the different types of policies is what's being covered. Under general liability insurance, what we are covering is bodily injury and property damage to a third party. It also covers personal injury, things like libel, slander, defamation of character. So we're providing a service and we injure a client, we injure a third party. We've gone into a client's home and we've damaged their property. General liability is what's going to pay those defense costs to the organization, anyone that's sued, and it's going to pay settlements or damages that are legally required to be paid. There's a couple things that we typically want to look at adding to a general liability policy. The first of those is what's called hired and non-owned auto liability insurance. Like I said, what we find one of the biggest exposures for a village organization is our transportation services. We've got volunteers driving their own personal vehicle, driving clients to different appointments. It's always going to be that individuals' drivers' own personal automobile policy that's primary to defend themselves and then to repair or replace damage to their vehicle. But if the organization gets brought into the lawsuit, the hired and non-owned insurance is going to be there to provide coverage to the organization as well as to the individual driver, supplemental to whatever type of insurance that they've got. If we're renting vehicles, it's going to do that as well. It's going to provide coverage to the organization and the employees, volunteers that might be driving that vehicle. If we're renting vehicles, you can also purchase what's called hired car physical damage, which pays the comp and collision on that rented vehicle as well. The other item is physical and sexual abuse coverages. This is something that we find probably half of our clients look into and get. It protects the organization whenever there's any kind of allegation of abuse between one of our volunteers and the clients that we serve. It's going to pay any kind of defense costs as well as any kind of settlements or damages as well. Properly written, your general liability should cover most of your special events and fundraisers. The company that we use typically is going to give you automatic coverage for any event that has less than 500 attendees, as long as it doesn't have water events or fireworks or a couple other high risk categories. If you do have a large event that might go over 500 people, that can be covered. It just requires an endorsement to do that. Directors and officers liability insurance covers the same people the general liability does. Covers the organization itself, all of the employees, volunteers, members of the board, directors, and officers. The distinction is we're not covering bodily injury and property damage with this policy. We're covering errors and omissions that lead to monetary damages. Some sort of breach of duty, misuse of funding, breaches of duties of obedience or loyalty by the board members. Some companies give you some limited coverage for breach of contract. So we've not physically hurt somebody, but the actions of the board, the actions of the organization have monetarily damaged a third party. This is what's going to protect the organization. Most directors and officers policies will extend coverage for employment practices liability. And this is extremely important for especially a new organization with employees. But a lot of times you'll find your third party discrimination coverage here. And so if we have employees and there's some sort of allegation of sexual harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination in the workplace, the directors and officers policy is gonna protect, pay the defense costs as well as any kind of settlements or damages to a third party. If we have some sort of discrimination claim from a potential member or client, we didn't provide service to them because of their age, the gender, their handicap status, whatever that might be. Third party discrimination coverage under the directors and officers can protect the organization for those items. There's a couple of other type of insurances that are important for nonprofits. I'm not going to get into those right now. I think Emily might get into some of that. And then I'll be speaking a little bit later on cyber insurance and anything I think that we need to add in there, I'll throw into that section.
Thank you, Andy. As a quick follow-up, why do you believe it's important to have D&O insurance, even if you do have general liability coverage?
Yeah, like I said, the policies cover the same people, and so we get that question a lot. That if my general liability covers my board of directors, why do I need a directors and officers policy? And it's our fault. It's the insurance company's fault by naming this thing a directors and officers policy, because it really covers so much more than just the directors and officers. It protects the whole organization. And so if we have a claim that isn't bodily injury or property damage related, if it's errors and omissions that lead to monetary damages, that's always going to be the directors and officers policy, even if it's not the board that's being sued, if it's just the organization, if it's just an employee or volunteer, the directors and officers policy is going to protect the organization and all of our stakeholders there.
Thank you. I got it. Emily, let me turn it over to you. And from a village perspective, how does insurance fit into the overall operations? For example, how do you determine what are the most important items for coverage as you're balancing a limited budget and resources from the village?
Great. Thank you, first off, for having me. I became the treasurer of the village of Tacoma Park in early March. And one of the first things I did when I took over was to check out the insurance, because first off, it pops out immediately when you look at the profit and loss statement, because it's probably one of the most expensive items on on the sheet, you know, in terms of how much it costs. But then as I took over as a treasurer, I wanted to personally see how was I covered? You know, was there directors and officers liability insurance? Is the village covered for liability? Did we have employees? Did we need workman's comp? Do we need, or did we need cyber insurance, you know, as things get more complicated and more online? I think from a village perspective, what I found in talking to other village people is that it's often unclear within the management of the village who has responsibility for risk management. Sometimes it's the treasurer, sometimes it's the president, sometimes people just think the risk lies with volunteers, and so sometimes the volunteer person kind of looks at some of that. But I do think there needs to be somebody designated within the village itself, and usually it will end up being the treasurer, that is in charge of looking across the village and seeing, even identifying what those risks are. Because you can think you know what insurance you need, but then until you really understand the programs and what people are doing and how they're reaching out, what types of work they're doing, do you really understand what kinds of insurance you need and what the risks actually are. I mean, I think there's always a push-pull between the cost of insurance. Insurance is expensive. Now, insurance, the liability insurance policies are excluding things like COVID, whereas possibly before they were covered. I mean, it's very complicated because as the market changes, I'm from Louisiana, which is an area that's often hit by hurricanes, and flood insurance, of course, is just like gone through the roof, or especially with climate change on all sorts of things. So whatever the market can certainly change, and you have to be aware of what that market is and what the insurance companies are including. So you can't even assume that when you renew your policy the following year that you're getting exactly the coverage that you had before, right? And so I think it's one of those things where from a village perspective, you have to stay in close contact with not only the program people and exactly what's going on, but also you need to stay in contact with your insurance agent to know exactly what's covered and what's available. I think that from what I can see, the biggest risk in terms of within villages is really discussing risk management, discussing the insurance, not just putting it in a little box and not, you know, getting with the volunteer coordinator, making sure the volunteers are well trained, understanding what form they sign in terms of waivers or insurances, or are they providing everything they need to provide.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Emily. Ken, I'd like to go back to you and ask you about policy endorsements, enhancements, and the importance of understanding the limits of your policies, and perhaps how do you identify what are some of the gaps that you are seeing?
Thanks. You know, endorsements and exclusions, there's broad exclusion endorsements and restrictive. And some of them, as Andy mentioned, you know, security events, cyber extortion, electronic data, workplace violence. Those are things that I think during the risk management planning process, you have to really understand. And it does take some time from a risk management perspective to understand that on both sides, both of the services that you are providing and how those services change, and the insurance you might need to cover yourself, and as those also change. So I think it's very important to understand what the endorsements and exclusions are for your insurance. And that's why I also agree that it is important for somebody in the organization. And I would, if it's not going to be a title position on the board, for instance, either the president or treasurer, and you know, I think the treasurer you can make a good case for the treasurer to be that person. to have another person specifically identified as your risk management officer, and to be able to make sure that that position is covered throughout the year, and especially as Andy was mentioning, that you have that you look at your policy prior to renewal, and how things might change and how the cost might change along with that. Insurance can, and cost of insurance can vary widely, and it's usually just goes up. And so it is oftentimes the biggest cost factor for a village. And how are you going to respond to that? And the endorsements enhancement piece is critical for that, is that you understand, what you may need to add or delete.
Thank you for that. Let's turn to cybersecurity and privacy of data, which is a growing concern for all operational systems. All the villages are using electronic money transferring systems. Villages have contact management databases. So we really need to understand what are the questions we need to be asking vendors about in order to protect the privacy of our member data. Where are we vulnerable? So Andy, could you help us address some of these issues in terms of privacy and cybersecurity?
Absolutely. Cyber liability is probably the fastest growing insurance coverage out there right now. It's something that we're seeing being required by a lot of jurisdictions that give grants, a lot of funders that provide grants. We are now seeing this as a standard type of coverage that's being required. Anytime we are collecting, storing personally identifiable information, which could be credit card numbers, names, dates of birth, social security numbers, anything where if someone, a bad actor, were to breach our system electronically and get access to that information, number one, we've got a requirement and responsibility to notify those people that have been affected. So there's a cost to those notifications that can be covered by cyber liability insurance. Then there's a liability component to it. We've made someone's information vulnerable, which could expose us to liability in a lawsuit. So we've got the liability component to that to defend the organization, any kind of settlements or damages to a third party. We've got things like cyber extortion, where someone's gotten control of our system and all of our data, and requires a ransom for us to get our information and get our system back. That is something that can be covered by cyber liability. Fund transfer fraud. This is one where I've seen way too many uncovered claims, where a bad actor has tricked us into sending money we shouldn't have. And they are very good at this. They have been in your system. They know who the players are. They know when that executive director is out meeting with a potential new partner and a fund transfer might be needed. And right at that point, the treasurer gets an email about where to send the funds they agreed to. And that's not where it was supposed to have been gone. As a risk management tool, we always want to make sure we have two different means of communication when we are changing where we wire or send money. We never just take an email as something we need to change. We need to follow up with an actual phone call conversation with that person to make sure that it's real. So all of these things are a much bigger part of our world right now, especially since COVID happened. We've become obviously a lot more virtual. Our dependence on computer systems and wiring money has only gone up. So there's some real important things that you want to be covering with cyber liability. When we are working with third-party partners and we have a contract and they might have access to that information, we really want to pay attention to what that contract says. What are the requirements that we have? What are the requirements that they have? What kind of cyber liability are they agreeing to carry, and how much are they indemnifying you for? Is it just the cost of the contract? Because I've seen that before, where they've only got a responsibility to fund back what you paid for the service. So we really want to make sure that they've got coverage, that the contract stipulates what we're entitled to, and that they are taking the right precautions. We want to ask them what are their risk management? How are they protecting the information? And obviously, it's a real good idea to have your own policy so that if anything slips through the cracks on their policy, we've got something here protecting us as well.
I think too, especially on some of the grant agreements that I've seen recently, those villages that get funding from foundations and other maybe municipalities, you have to really look at the language of those grant agreements, because there's always going to be a section in there called insurance requirements, because a lot of foundations are shifting the burden of insurance liability to who it is they're giving money to. And so they're going to have some strict requirements in that contract that say what your minimal professional liability needs to be, what your, just the limits on all that. And so you definitely, if you have a contract that you're signing, you want to make sure that you cut and paste that section of the contract on insurance and send it to your broker and say, okay, this is what somebody is, a funder is requiring, and does my policy cover that? Right? What do I need to change to make sure? Don't just automatically sign the contract and without looking at it. The other thing about the cyber insurance was the last organization that I worked for, we got hit pretty hard on a cyber fraud issue, and the insurance thankfully covered a forensic accountant, a forensic organization to come in and figure out what went wrong, how did we get defrauded, what needed to happen to change. They paid us back the money that was lost, and put in systems that needed to happen. So especially with COVID-19 and everybody going electronic, the cyber threat has gotten a lot bigger for even the very smallest of organizations.
Totally agree. Thank you for that explanation. At this point, I'm going to take a pause and start to look at the chat and address some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat room. The first one relates to what we call Good Samaritan laws, which are at the federal and state level provisions that protect volunteers. Could someone from the panel overview the specific Good Samaritan laws in DC, Virginia, and Maryland?
There are both state and federal statutes. There's the federal statute, volunteer protection statute, and each state has their own statutes as well. The important thing to know is that, number one, those statutes don't protect the organization. And really, when we see claims, lawsuits, they're not really going after board members for the most part. They're going after the organization. So there's still this need to carry insurance for the organization. Number two, those volunteer protection statutes, both state and federally, don't say that volunteers can't be sued. They give them a defense if they are sued, and that's very good. But we have to defend ourselves. We have to go into the court and say we're covered under volunteer protection statutes, to get dismissed. So there's a cost to that. Another reason why you need to have insurance. And the last time I looked, it's been a little while, but those protection statutes specifically did not provide any kind of protection for employment practices liability. Things like sexual harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination weren't covered by that, which is something that's typically covered under the directors and officers policy. So, and I mean, it's great that those volunteer protection statutes are there. We want them to be there, but they are not the end all be all. There are still exposures that need to be covered and insured for.
Understood. Could you share with us what are some of the ballpark costs for D&O insurance as well as general liability?
For most villages, smaller villages, the basic general liability cost is usually around $650 annually. If you want to add sexual abuse molestation coverage, that starts at about $700 annually. If you want to add that hired and non-owned coverage, it's usually about $250 to $450 based on the number of drivers and rides we're giving. Directors and officers liability, if you have no employees, we typically see that around $600 annually. If you have employees, it means we need to add back that employment practices liability, and that usually takes it to the $1,000 to $1,200 range. So those are kind of the minimum premiums we see for the smaller nonprofit organizations. And obviously, as the nonprofit grows and gets bigger and are doing more, those costs can go up. But that's kind of what we see.
Thank you. In terms of litigation and lawsuits, could any of the panelists address how many lawsuits have been brought against the villages and for what specifically?
I have no idea.
I have not seen a lot, thank goodness. I can't think of any specifically, but fortunately there haven't been many.
Okay, that's
Does Barbara
good.
know? Does Barbara know?
Barbara, could you address that?
Trying to find the unmute button, sorry. There haven't been major ones nationally. There've been a couple of small ones where somebody has fallen or whatnot, but not against the actual village.
Very good, thank you. As we all know, good doctor-patient communication is proven to reduce the risk of medical lawsuits. To what extent do you think that good communication about these are your neighbors helping you could mitigate the risk of a lawsuit against a village?
I think in general, open communication with the people we serve so that they know what the expectations are for what we're providing to them is a good idea from a loss management. Certainly eliminating that gap of expectation of what they think we should be doing and what we are doing is going to be important in protecting ourselves. But when it comes down to it, I mean, no amount of communication is going to absolve you from that negligence of someone getting hurt. And unfortunately, there's just people out there that are more litigious than others. And we come across that individual, it's they're the difficult ones.
Understood.
I would agree with Andy. Is I think that the communication, developing the risk management plan is an important piece, of course, but then having both the members and the volunteers understand what those policies are. For instance, in a driver, can you do a driver assist? What are some of the hands-on assistance that can be done or not done? And I think that, when you're developing the plan, what can a volunteer do and what increases your liability is important to communicate across everybody that's involved in the village.
I have to agree. I think it's really important that's why having a designated person be the risk management person within a village is very important, because that person has to communicate with the volunteer coordinator and with other people to constantly to make sure they understand what volunteers are being asked to do. And is there any mission creep going on where people are beginning to do more? A volunteer just wants to be helpful, and then before you know it, they're doing X, Y, Z. Oh, while you're in the car, can you do this? Can you do this or this or this? It's really important to constantly be listening intently, and sometimes just water cooler talk in terms of like what's going on, to pick up on something that is a red flag. And I think really communicating with committee chairs on the ground, participating in as many meetings as you can, just even if you're not a speaker, but just listening in the background as somebody that's in charge of risk management, it's really important to do that.
Yeah.
Right. Real quickly, how do you find an insurance broker that would be appropriate to work with the village?
I can talk a little bit about that just from my experience with nonprofits. Usually what happens is that when a leadership changes, you come in and you take over from whoever has been doing the insurance before, right? You usually come in the middle of a policy year, somebody says, well, who's the broker? And you get the phone number and you find out. For me, what I do is the following year after I've taken over, I then begin to think about, is this broker the best broker for our village, right? Has that person been in contact with me? When I initially reached out, did they respond back to me? When I said, could you review this, or could you review that, or could you go over the limits of the policy? Did they respond in an appropriate way, in a manner? I mean, obviously for me, I tend to have worked with insurance brokers that have experiences with nonprofits, right? And so I think it's also a personal relationship. Do you get along with the person? Do you, what are the prices? Do they care enough to put things out on bid every year to come back to you preemptively and say, okay, look, your policy is up for renewal. I think these rates, I can do better on these rates. Let's go out, let's discuss. So I think it's really important. The customer service is really important, and not just at the very end of the year when all of a sudden it's time to renew.
Right. I've seen this question come up from time to time. Oftentimes our volunteer drivers, they're not comfortable having their own personal auto insurance be the primary carrier as they do the transportation services for the village. Any advice to make a volunteer driver more comfortable with this? Or do you have any ideas for us in terms of this issue?
I mean, I would just say initially is that I remind people that this is neighbors helping neighbors, and it's probably not as much of an issue if you were to drive your neighbor to the doctors or help them out. This is more formalized, of course, and that's the great benefit of being in a village. But I think that there are additional protections, but that's really part of being a volunteer and services that you're offering, is that there's risk to everything, and that's part of it. But I think that it's really great to hear that there hasn't been a lot of litigation across villages across the country. And I think that's a message that can be reiterated to your members.
Right, absolutely. We talked a little bit about this in the cybersecurity discussion, but there's a question around the exchange of funds. Many villages are exchanging electronic funds with banks, insurance companies. Many villages on their websites have PayPal set up. What risk do you all see with those systems?
Ooh, that's
well, I mean, there's always a risk in everything. I mean, from our standpoint, what I see as the riskiest is that time in which you're asked to change the account numbers, the way that you send money. That is where I feel you're at the most risk, is when that change is being made, because that is potentially when someone is getting you to do something that you shouldn't. I personally have never seen an issue when someone is sending money the same way they've always done it. That's never been a problem. As far as what I see is someone has asked me to change where I'm sending money to, how I send it, the bank account has changed. That's when you run into issues, as far as from what I've seen.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. On an operational point of view, it really is if a vendor, you know, calls and says, oh, my bank account has changed. You know, could you please change my routing numbers and all of that? You know, that warrants a phone call to the accountant that you're used to dealing with at that particular vendor. You know, you get on the phone and you say, John, you know, I got this email that asked me to change your routing numbers, and you know, John, often a video call is really important, not just a phone call, but actually a video chat call, because you can see the person on the other end and you know who you're talking to. That is where, so I mean, I would not at all change any routing numbers or account numbers on anything through an email or through just somebody sending a form. It warrants two forms of communication and verification. And also, I think it's important to have a relationship with your banker and to have somebody at the bank that you can call for support.
Good suggestions.
I would add that it's be mandatory training for cybersecurity for anybody that has funds transfer. There are online trainings that are available, and it's something that always has to be top of the mind.
Yes, those are really helpful, those online sessions. Our Village to Village national organization, the V2V network, they get asked frequently to be the main insurance carrier and then perhaps have riders for individual villages. As we previously discussed, regulations, insurance regs vary from state to state. And so the Village to Village network has looked at this, but it doesn't seem feasible. But we're wondering today, is there a way to perhaps regionally have some policies that we could bundle and share on a regional basis with the villages across the country?
This is Mary Jo. Some of you may be aware that Montgomery County spent some significant time looking into that to see if the Montgomery County villages could come up with a bundled insurance policy. And that was even within one county, and the answer was no.
Okay.
For most coverages is extremely different. As Ken said initially, if you've seen one village, you've seen one village. And that's extremely important. Every organization is different, and the insurance needs of one organization can be completely different from the insurance needs to the village next door. And so it's hard to find a policy that does everything for everyone. We've been successful in doing, say, a directors and officers program for different types of organizations that have a similar mission. But you run into, okay, how do you set that up? Is it a discounted rate program that each organization accesses separately? Is it a master policy that you mentioned, endorsements that are issued? If it's a master policy, then you have an administration issue. Who's in charge of making sure everyone's properly added to that policy? And then there's collecting premium. How does the premium get collected? Does each organization send in their own payment to the insurance company? Or is that one organization responsible for collecting all that money? What if they can't collect the money? If everyone's responsible for sending their own payment in, what if one organization doesn't send their payment in and a notice of cancellation is issued? There's a lot of administration stuff that goes with that, and it can be a lot more difficult than you might think to put something like that together.
Understood.
So let me just get this clear, Andy. Sorry to interrupt, Blake.
Sorry.
So you could have a master policy, let's say regionally, for D&O insurance, but you would need a dedicated staff person or a person to administer it. So B2V could conceptually do something like this, but it would
Potentially, yeah.
require really a dedicated, but it would only be for DNO.
Right, something like that.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Helpful. Thank you, Andy. Andy, you talked about costs previously for general liability insurance and D&O. What about costs for automobile insurance to supplement individual driver personal expenses?
I'm sorry, I'm having a dog issue here. Hey, Taylor, can you please come? Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. We talked about general liability cost. Could you talk about a dollar amount of additional auto coverage that a village could carry to supplement what some of its personal drivers' insurance costs are?
So yeah, that's what we're talking about, that hired and non-owned coverage.
Right.
It does supplement what that driver has. Your typical first layer of coverage is $1 million. That's what most organizations carry. Beyond that, you can get an umbrella policy that would cover over that general liability and hired and non-owned coverages, and you can get that in levels of $1 million up to probably $5 million without too much of a headache. Beyond that, insurance companies might be wary of going much higher than that. As far as limits go, that's what limit should I carry, especially on liability? That's the toughest question you can ask me, because the true answer is I don't know how big of a liability lawsuit you could get. I don't know if you're gonna run a school bus off a cliff and something horrible happens. You can spend your entire budget on insurance. If you want to do that, we can find a way, but that's not, we want to balance how much we spend on insurance versus how we're spending our money on our program objectives. So most organizations are going to carry $1 million. You can go higher than that if you want, but $1 million is usually what we see.
Okay, thanks so much. At this point, I'm going to turn it back to Seal. I want to thank all of our panelists for answering the questions in the chat, and Seal's going to talk about our breakout sessions.
Thanks, Lee. Thank you, and thanks to all of our panelists. And unfortunately, Andy can't stay with us for the breakout meetings, but Lee, Emily, and Ken will each have a breakout meeting. We will be Jonas has divided up the attendees to each breakout randomly. We can just continue this discussion. I can't say we'll have the answers, but it'll give us a chance to maybe help one another sort out some issues. I know, for example, I'm the one who asked the question about how much coverage you should have for auto insurance, and it's because my own village has talked about whether we should add more or less. So I think that conversation among village peers will be helpful. If there are any really big burning issues that we cannot answer in our breakout rooms, and by the way, they'll be recorded just as this general discussion was. Andy, I might put you on the spot. If there's really a burning issue or two, might I get back with you and then post that information to the attendees?
All right, no problem.
And by the way, Andy has also provided a nice primer that we can send out. We send out the recordings of these sessions. It's a nice overview, I think would be helpful to you to look at. So that's to come. It is 11:09. What do you say we break until 11:15? We'll do the breakouts for 45 minutes, and then we won't be coming back into the general meeting room again. That will be it once we adjourn from the breakouts, but let's give ourselves the next 5 to 6 minutes just to go grab a cup of coffee or something. And we will see you in the breakout rooms.
Excuse me.
Mary Jo, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for participating. And we're sorry we can't gather again at the end, but I think it's been a lively discussion. And we hope to see you again on one of our other 1-hour Zoom sessions, or definitely in October.
I'm
And
sorry,
thank
I
you,
have to,
Teal.
I have to,
Thank
I
you,
have,
Teal, for a fine program.
hello?
Patricia, what were you
Okay,
asking?
yes, I was just going to say, I have to bow, I have another appointment.
Okay, we
Okay.
understand. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, very interesting. Bye-bye.